Hello, listeners, and welcome to today's edition of the Peggy Smedley Show. I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. Today on the show, we're talking rail. Rail is the backbone of the U.S. economy and a sector facing real pressure as freight demand, costs, and complexity rise. Railroads aren't struggling because they lack data. They're struggling because the systems running them weren't built for the speed, scale, or complexity of today's operations. At the same time, AI is beginning to reshape how railroads operate, from customer interactions to frontline decisions. To break down where the industry is headed and how AI agents and real-time decision tools are changing rail, I'm joined by Krishnan, who is the industry advisor for Microsoft Manufacturing and Mobility. Krishnan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peggy. Good to be here.
I'm delighted to have you on the show because this is a great topic, one that we haven't really explored much with Microsoft and looking at rail. And I think our listeners would be really excited to talk about it because I think it's one we forget about. It just happens. We go from one part of the country to the other and goods go there and we don't really give it much thought, but it's one we need to. So I thought maybe we could start our conversation by having you give us a little primer of the railroad industry and perhaps even the importance of the overall health of the economy.
Sure, Peggy. So here is the thing most people don't realize. Freight rail is kind of this invisible backbone of the whole economy. Railroads move around 40% of long distance freight in the US when you measure it by ton miles. That's everything from the grain that becomes your food to the chemicals that go into manufacturing to the cars and the consumer goods sitting in stores. So if rail stopped moving, you would feel it everywhere within days. And it is incredibly efficient as what it does, the rail does. A train can move a ton of freight, something like 470 miles on a single gallon of diesel. Nothing else on land comes close. So it is not just big, it is the most cost efficient, most fuel efficient way to move heavy freight over long distances. It is also a foundational layer underneath basically every other supply chain we deal with every day. Now it is growing or shrinking. I would say it is more transforming than either. Volumes have been relatively flat to modestly up depending on the segment and the year. It is a mature industry, but that's exactly why this moment matters. When you cannot grow just by moving more stuff, the competitive question becomes how well do you run what you have already got? And that's really the whole story right now. The railroads have spent decades and hundreds of billions building out the physical network. The next chapter isn't about more steel in the ground, it is about getting more out of the network that already exists.
Christian, I love hearing what you're saying because, first of all, we're celebrating our 250th year anniversary here, and rail is so critical to that. And so when you talk about this moment matters, I think it matters to all of us because it's such a critical time in history that the railroad and how it really happened in history. And I think there's a lot of discussion right now about supply chain shakeups, disruption, demand swings, energy costs, and all these challenges impacting core businesses. And if we think about that overall, it's very interesting for us to talk about rail. But what are customers saying overall? When you talk about where do you go next, it makes me think about how can technology, as you just described, this industry that really now has to do more with what? How is technology helping create new opportunities for it? Because we need rail. We need rail in so many ways that it's got to do more with and be innovative and creative.
Yeah, so what I hear over and over is that variability is the real enemy. It is not any one shock. It is the shocks keep coming and they are hard to predict in terms of demand swings, a weather event, an energy price spike, or a congestion at a terminal, right? And because the rail network behaves like a living system, a problem in one place doesn't stay there. It cascades. A delay in one yard becomes a problem 3 regions away. And here is the frustrating part for a lot of operators. It is not that they lack the data, they are drowning in it. Sensors, telemetry, asset health, the network conditions, all of it. The gap is turning that data into a coordinated decision in that moment. Most railroads operators are still running on fragmented systems and reactive processes. So optimizing them locally instead of across the whole network, that gives them a significant advantage. So where is technology is creating real opportunity is in connecting all of that, right? It is all fragmented system. How do we connect all those things and surface those insights? So when you put the right intelligence on top of the data they already have, they can start observing that volatility instead of just reacting to it. So they can see the cascade coming and get ahead of it. And the most exciting part is the value is already sitting there in the network. It is latent. So you don't need to build anything new to unlock it. You just need to make thousands of better decisions every hour across the system. That is the shift we keep pushing. And this is an intelligence opportunity, not an infrastructure one.
It's very interesting to hear you say that you have to look at all the data. And you would think industry by industry would be catching on to this. The rail is not an industry that should know this. They should, because they've been around for so long. But we hear every industry has all this data and it's just sitting there. And it's time that they leverage this data. And I think it's important to understand, if you don't leverage data, how will you know how to improve all the things you're doing? How do you get everybody involved in that? And you said the right words. It's latent data, and it's just there waiting to be tapped to make better business decisions, to save time, to save money, reliability, safety, all the things we're going to talk about. But you have a customer that's been doing it and figuring it out and getting better. So talk about a customer right now. I think it's CSX, and you and I talked briefly about it, but they're understanding, they've done some work with AI agent development. And I think it shows that this is just one opportunity of many more things that they can do. Dive into what they've done.
Yeah, and what I think is more instructive about that kind of work, what we have done in CSX, isn't the technology itself. It is where they pointed to. They went after customer experience, putting intelligence directly into the customer facing workflow. And the reason that is smart is the value shows up fast and is also very visible. So you can actually measure it. The usage goes up, the response times comes down. So when you put intelligence right in the hands of the customer, instead of burying it in some back office analytics function, people use it. And that creates this immediate, undeniable proof point. So the bigger lesson is about how you approach these things. The railroads that move fast treat AI as a way to make the actual work better, not as a science project you run off in a corner and admire from a distance. They unify information from their systems of record into one view. So somebody can ask a plain language question and get a real actionable answer without digging through 6 different tools. So that low friction entry point is what lets you move quickly. So you pick a spot where the value is obvious, you prove it, and then earns you to get the room to go bigger and get to the adjacent rooms of the house as well.
Again, this is what we tell in other industries. It's just repeatable, repeatable, repeatable. Here is you pick the project, you see what you can. And I like the idea of the low friction because it's measurable. You've described the customer says they're working with something that's visible to be able to see the results. It's measurable. You talked about all of this response. The customers can see it. That's where they're not saying, look, it's in that back room. It's data we don't see. All those things that you said, I think it's powerful for people to understand. This is why you look at technology, and it's able for you to say, we're not just putting money into something that doesn't deliver results. Talk a little bit more about CSX and the intelligence directly in those hands. How does that usage go up? What is it actually telling us about where the industry overall then is headed? Because as this example, it blossoms, others can leverage this and they can see what the future is going to hold.
Yeah. It tells me the demand was always there. The barrier was just the access. People weren't avoiding intelligence because they did not want it. They avoided it because getting to it was clunky. The second, you remove that friction, all this latent demand that was sitting there, suppressed by bad interfaces and fragmented systems, suddenly surfaces. And I really think what we are seeing on the customer side is a preview of what happens inside the organization. Same exact principle. Put the intelligence right in the hands of whoever is making the decision. And that is just as true for a dispatcher or a maintenance planner, or it is for a customer. So where it is headed towards intelligent everywhere a decision gets made, so not locked up in a central team that produces reports nobody reads in time. The whole direction of travel is the frontline, specifically the frontline workers. So they're no longer waiting around for insights, so they are just acting on it in real time. So CSX is an early signal of a much bigger pattern.
When you look at CSX, they're a wonderful example of saying what information data leads to results. It's a wonderful journey that others can follow. I guess we should talk deeper about how AI is actually changing the role of the frontline worker, because I think that's a powerful story for others to understand, because it's turning, I shouldn't say alluded, you actually said that turning operators into real-time decision makers rather than information gatherers or hunters, or they're not having to dig into data. So I guess the question is, how is this happening? And how should other organizations look to this to look into the future to make better decisions?
Yeah, so this is a shift I find most underappreciated because right now, so much of a skilled person's day goes into just hunting for information, jumping between tools, reconciling systems, piecing the pictures together before they can even make the decision. So, and the decisions, the valuable part. So we buried it under all this data, and there is a great real world example of this. So the Rumo, the big Brazilian freight operator, built an AI assistant for their train drivers. For years, these drivers literally carried about 4 kilograms of printed manuals. And when an operator needs to look at something up, it took around 4 minutes. With the AI agent, the response time dropped from 4 minutes to 3 seconds. So they achieved this ROI in under 2 months. So now think about what that actually does. It is not just faster lookups in going back to the manuals. It flips the worker's role. They stopped being an information gatherer and became a decision maker. The AI does the assembly, pulls everything into one view, surfaces the context, gives them the validated answer, and the person makes the call. In this case, the driver makes the call. So for the veteran workers, that means the broader visibility and faster access. For your newer people, the newbies, it makes all that institutional knowledge instantly reachable. So, and the human stays in control the whole time, whether it is a new person or a veteran person. So you are not replacing the front line, you are freeing them up to do the part only they can do.
Does it then come down to trust and awareness and knowledge to be able to make those decisions? Because now you're saying you're putting those decisions in the front line. So an organization has to believe you trust those frontline workers to make good decisions, even though you're saying the AI is giving them, but you have to trust they're making the best decisions. And now we're talking about safety here.
Absolutely. That is where the guardrails of AI comes into picture. So this has been trained properly. It is being with the right content. So you are basically the system, you're providing the data, you're training the system with what you just mentioned, Peggy, about safety. That is a very, very critical aspect in this industry. So you cannot afford to make any mistakes. So putting the right guardrails in terms of responsible AI, and making sure that the data is being validated and it's been tested so that you can confidently put it in the hands of the frontline workers.
So when we look at this, we're already talking about the data. You're putting it in the hands of these frontline workers, but there's other ROI things. You talked about 4 minutes to 3 seconds. That's a big ROI. What about other savings when we talk about fuel and energy remains major cost drivers? And there are a lot. We've seen fuel costs go through the roof. Now they're changing, they're starting to come down. But where do you see AI helping railroads optimize where they already have been turning to big capital projects?
No, it's a great point on the fuel, right? So fuel is one of the biggest variables in the whole business in this industry, often 15 to 20% of operating expenses. That is a pretty big number. And what is wild is how inconsistent it is, right? You can run two trains down similar corridors and get totally different fuel outcomes depending on the route, the train, the way the train is set up, how it is being driven, how congested things are. And the industry is kind of just accepted that variability as the way it is, but it isn't. And the outside pressures only gotten worse. Diesel prices have swung hard last few years. The global supply shocks, the geopolitical shift, the Iran conflict was a recent reminder of how fast those energy markets can move. So that is the margin volatile, mostly out of the railroads' hands. They cannot control this. But here is the opportunity. Most fuel optimization today is static. It is rule-based, cannot adapt to what actually is happening in real time. Switch to dynamic intelligence-driven optimization of train handling, how the train's configured, how the routing is being optimized, and you can cut fuel use somewhere in the range of 3 to 7%. Better pacing, fewer pointless stops, less idling, freight that keeps moving. And those same improvements ease congestion, so it compounds across the network. And this is the cleanest example of my whole argument, really, that tens of millions in annual saving plus real emissions reduction with none of the capital burden or the multi-year timeline of something like electrification. So before you reach for a giant capital project, optimize what you already own. 9 times out of 10, that is the faster, higher return move.
You mentioned something earlier that you briefly just said, weather. And what comes to mind as I hear you talk is optimizing with AI agents when we're looking at weather. Trains get stopped because of that. Are we seeing the ability to leverage AI agents to reroute trains because we know weather conditions? Are we able to do things such as that?
Absolutely. Weather is a event which we can predict to some extent, but it rerouting the network, the congestions. So it plays a major role. So it is like any other supply chain event. So when there is a delay in the shipment arrival. So we run into this weather problem most often in the winter time, especially in the Midwest, right? We have significant amount of snow. So all those things impacts the supply chain. So we wanted to make sure that every customer is looking for estimated time of arrival of the goods. So the weather analytics plays a huge role in the rail freight to make sure we are not disrupting the supply chain and making sure that the goods reach from point A to point B on time. So the weather events plays a major role, and it helps to optimize the route, not just the route alone, but also helps to optimize the workforce, right? When these workforce need to be in place to make sure that the schedules are maintained to get to the right place at the right time.
You made me think of that because I was thinking about fuel, optimizing it, then weather. And then that leads me now to think about, as you're doing all these things with so many experienced workers retiring, there's lots of things. It's a lot of different things happening in industries. What happens with all these experienced workers retiring? Is it an industry that we're getting new, younger workers in? Or how can AI agents help capture customer service customers, that knowledge? Do you have any examples of that? Because I'm thinking you have to think about all the things that are happening. You want to maximize fuel, you want to maximize all of that energy, you want to maximize what happens in the environment because of weather conditions. Now you want to maximize all of the expertise of workers retiring. How do you capture that experienced workers' knowledge that are retiring? Because now they have to know what others do not know, because it comes with years of experience to know how to plan, forecast, adjust, manage. With experience comes knowledge.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it is an industry problem. All right. This is the one that honestly worries me the most because it is so quiet. So you got a huge chunk of your most experienced operators and technicians heading for the door. And this industry needs a lot of frontline workers. They are the one doing the grunt work. And what they are carrying around in their heads is this knowledge, how to spot a failure that isn't obvious, how to stay calm and manage a disruption under pressure, how to make a trade-off call in real time. And none of those things, right, are written down anywhere, which makes it incredibly hard to pass it on. And the risk isn't just to fewer bodies, it is the lower decision quality, the slower responses, more variability, right at the moments where experience used to save you, right? So replacing a skilled rail worker isn't cheap either. It can run 1.5 to 2 times the salary when you count recruiting, training, the long ramp to actually being good at it. So this is where AI agents are genuinely powerful. So going back to that Rumo example we just talked about, what they really did was take their entire approved body of procedures and put it in every operator's hand instantly, right? It is instantaneous, always current, always validated. They said something like 1.3 million printed pages a year and recovered over almost like 7,500 hours of productivity. So that is an institutional knowledge living in the system instead of walking out the door. So the way I think about it is co-pilots, right? We talk about co-pilots and how co-pilots can do two things. They embed that expertise right into the daily workflow so the knowledge stays. And also, they close the experience gap in real time. A newer employee gets handed the kind of context a 30-year veteran would just have in their head, while the person still makes the actual call, right? So you're not replacing judgment, you are scaling it and you are capturing it before it retires.
I know you're going to laugh at my question here, but as I hear you talk, I think of the television show Big Bang and Sheldon loving trains. Do we have that youth excitement anymore of wanting to be in the train, the railroad industry, wanting to be a part of it? Or do we have to worry that AI is taking away that excitement for the railroad industry that we're talking about today?
The railroad is a very, very, very worker intensive industry, right? Yes, the younger generation is looking at it saying that, okay, I need to do the same grunt work. But this technology is going to attract the talent, right? So you don't need that experience to know there is going to be a wear in the track, what type of preventive maintenance you need to do, or a safety procedures to carry out, right? When we cross the signals, the railroad signals, right? That is all safety equipment. It's all grunt work. Now with this AI, it is going to, in my view, it is going to attract more workers in this space because it is going to make it's a gamification in terms of using these new tools, and you actually see something happening, moving goods from point A to point B and saving the environment. And also with all this latest and greatest technology being used to move the needle in this freight industry. So in my view, it is going to attract more talent, but we are solving that gap in terms of people walking out with the knowledge. So that is also going to help the younger generation to learn and execute their task in a much faster pace.
What does the industry have to do to continue to encourage the next generation to want to be in this industry? Because that's a part of this. We're talking about it's starting up its game. It's looking at the data. It's starting to use AI agents, just like any other industry that's stealing the talent. So this industry has to show that it's just as exciting and it's moving forward. It's being as aggressive. What kind of things does it need to do?
It is basically an education, right? A lot of times we all see as a kid, we get excited when the train passes through the signals in the rail crossings. We are fascinated when we were kids. But what is really this industry is going up is the amount of goods, right? You're not just talking about just the freight. Think about even moving people, right? We don't talk a lot about in North America about passenger rails because we have only Amtrak. But if you go into some of those metros and people travel really fast from point A to point B in some of those big metros in our country, that thing has to be humming every minute, every hour. You can't afford a train to be taken off the track and so many passengers get impacted, and it is going to disrupt their daily schedule. So it is a very fascinating industry with the technology being injected in every part of the value chain, which is going to make it more fun to work in this industry.
And that's a very good point, because that idea of not letting a minute or two delay a train, a passenger train, makes all the difference. And putting it in those frontline workers' hands to know, to be responsible, to make adjustments is critical. So what are your final thoughts on what we've talked about today? Because it's not just about moving goods and services that we're doing, it's about moving people and getting them to where they need to be, to work, to an entertainment venue, whatever it might be across the country.
If there is a one idea I would want people to walk away with, it's this. The future of railroads isn't going to be defined by a single piece of technology. It is a convergence of the data, which they have been generating for decades, the decisions and the human intelligence into one coordinated system. And I would really reframe the whole conversation, right? For decades, the instinct in this industry has been need more capacity. It's all about capacity. Build more rail tracks, build more containers, et cetera, et cetera. So more track, more yards, more equipment. But the uncomfortable truth is most railroads aren't actually constrained by the infrastructure. They have enough infrastructure. They are constrained by how well they run the network they already have. So the next 10% of performance isn't going to come from more assets. It is really going to come from the ability to make thousands of better decisions every hour, every minute across the network. So the question for the leaders in this industry isn't really whether intelligence is going to shape the future of rail. That part is settled. It is how fast you can put it to work, running the infrastructure you already own with more precision, more resilience, and more efficiency. So the leaders who move decisively here won't just get more efficient, they will redefine what's ever possible inside their existing footprint. So that is the opportunity. It is the intelligence, not the infrastructure.
This has been an amazing conversation. Krishnan, Microsoft Industry Advisor for Manufacturing Mobility, thank you for spending so much time with me today. Where can our listeners go to get more information from you and from Microsoft on the railroad industry?
Yeah, please visit the aka.ms/mobility. That is where we talk about all this industry, specifically around railroads, include freights and passengers. And you also get more information on other industries, the adjacent industry, right, in the travel, in the hospitality industry. So you can get more information visiting the specific site, aka.ms/mobility.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Peggy.
Okay, listeners, that is all the time we have for the show today. Make sure to share and subscribe to our episodes each week. Share your thoughts with me on X at Connected World, or follow me on LinkedIn or YouTube and continue the conversation there. Please check out our website at connectedworld.com, our show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. Remember, we broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central, and you can check out our podcast every Thursday. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, your voice for our connected world. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility.